VR is the next big step in gaming that, love it or hate it, is undoubtedly gaining momentum. Big companies like Valve are finally pushing big releases like Half Life Alyx that are pulling new people into the scene. But one of the big hurdles of VR hasn't changed much, its price. In addition to the VR hardware itself, you need to buy and build a PC that's able to push frames to that hardware. So how good of a PC do you need for this? Let's begin. To get started, it's important to recognize that VR games don't run exactly like normal pancake games. The largest difference is that your game needs to render 2 frames, one for each eye, instead of 1 frame. Another thing to remember is that the resolution for each eye can be deceivingly high. So effectively, you're trying to run 2 high-resolution screens at once at a high refresh rate. As you can imagine, this takes a lot more work on the PC's part. The obvious component to bring up first is the graphics card. You're probably thinking that you're going to need a high-tier 2070 or 2080 card after what I just said, right? Well, surprisingly, some VR headsets actually have pretty low minimum specs. For example, Windows mixed reality headsets often only need a GTX 960 or 1050 to run. However, like pancake games, this can change depending on the game that you want to run. For example, Boneworks, a largely popular title for VR right now, requests a minimum of a GTX 970 or GTX 1060, and that is if you're running off the Rift, Rift S, or HTC Vive, which are all notably last-gen headsets. If you plan on picking up the newest Valve Index, Boneworks wants at least a GTX 1080 or 2060 Super. This is also a spec that is for recommended requirements for the OG headsets, but this gives you a good idea of what we're dealing with. Next up, we have the CPU. While you'd think that most of the changes would be made to the GPU with it rendering twice as hard, for basic VR, the CPU is used to track the player as well as to run the VR software. And many VR games like Boneworks is very heavy on physics for general gameplay. Some of the other notable physics-heavy games would be Blade and Sorcery and Gorn, which are also both very popular VR titles. Going back to Boneworks, their minimum requirements say that you can get away with running a quad core at 3 GHz, but they recommend at least an i7 7700K. Granted, the CPU scene has changed quite a bit since the 7th gen Intel, with i5s getting 6 cores and all, but you definitely want to make sure your multi-core performance is good enough before you buy a PC for VR. For all your other components, it's pretty standard for a gaming PC with a notable exception of memory. You can still get away with just 8 gigs of RAM if you're lucky, but it's still better with 16. However, unlike normal games, memory speed can actually have a huge impact on VR performance. So if you want to absolutely maximize the frames you get out of your build, you may want to consider shelling out a little bit more for memory with a higher clock rate. So finally, what do you absolutely need for a good experience with VR? Honestly, unless you're going for unreasonable amounts of eye candy, you can get away with a VR PC build that's less than $600 if you're playing more casual titles like Beat Saber. If you can spend a bit more, the next tier would be about $750 without needing to worry about upgrading for a while. You can even drop this build down to a 1660 if the games you're playing aren't that graphically intensive or you just need better CPU performance. So there you go. VR isn't quite as expensive as you might think, and for those of you just not joining the scene, I hope that you have a great time with your new setup. If this video helped you out, consider liking the video and subscribing, as I likely have more VR content coming up. If you want to hear me talk about a specific topic, please leave a comment with your suggestion. Thank you and goodbye until next time.